Billionaire laughs at a poor man's dream years later, he begs for his help. The room buzzed with energy as people milled about, their laughter and clinking glasses filling the grand hall. Victor Crane stood at the center of it all, the pinnacle of success in his sharp tailored suit, a glass of champagne in hand. His grin was wide, and his eyes sparkled with the confidence of a man who had conquered every challenge life had thrown his way. To him, this gala was just another stage where he could flaunt his dominance, a stage where everyone else was merely a spectator. Across the room, Daniel Rivera hesitated at the edge of the crowd, clutching a worn portfolio to his chest. He didn't belong here, not in this world of glittering chandeliers and designer gowns. But he had come anyway, drawn by a mix of desperation and determination. Tonight was his chance, the opportunity to present his idea to someone who could make it a reality. He had spent years dreaming of this moment. The sustainable housing project he envisioned wasn't just an idea, it was his way of giving back to the community that had raised him. It was a lifeline for people like him, people who grew up in neighborhoods where hope was a luxury no one could afford. He had sketched plans, run numbers, and perfected every detail. Now he just needed someone to believe in it. "Excuse me, Mr. Crane," Daniel said as he approached, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "I'm Daniel Rivera. I've been following your work for years, and I think I have a project that might interest you." Victor turned to face him, his grin fading slightly as he took in the sight of Daniel. The younger man's ill-fitting suit and worn shoes spoke volumes about his financial situation. Victor's lips twitched into a smirk. "A project, you say? What kind of project could you possibly have that would interest me?" Daniel swallowed hard, refusing to let Victor's condescension faze him. "It's a sustainable housing initiative. Affordable, eco-friendly homes for underserved communities. It's scalable, cost-effective, and has the potential to change lives." Victor let out a short laugh, loud enough to draw the attention of a few nearby guests. "Change lives, you say? That's quite the lofty goal." He turned to the man standing beside him, a fellow billionaire with an equally smug expression. "Did you hear that, Carter? This kid thinks he can change lives with his, what is it? Eco-houses?" The men chuckled and Daniel felt heat rise to his face. "Yes, I do. With the right investment, this could be a game changer." Victor shook his head, his smirk widening. "Listen, kid. Dreams are nice and all, but they're not enough. This world is about power and money. You don't get anywhere without them." He took a sip of his champagne, his gaze sweeping dismissively over Daniel. "You should stick to something realistic." Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to remain calm. "You don't know me, Mr. Crane. And you don't know what I'm capable of." Victor arched an eyebrow, his grin turning sharper. "Oh, I think I do. And let me give you some advice for free. Dreams don't pay the bills." With that, he turned away, dismissing Daniel without another thought. For a moment, Daniel stood frozen in place, the humiliation burning in his chest. Around him, the laughter and chatter continued as if nothing had happened. But as the sting of Victor's words began to fade, it was replaced by something stronger, resolve. He didn't need Victor's validation. He would prove him wrong on his own terms. Daniel spent the following weeks working tirelessly on his project. He picked up extra shifts at the auto shop where he worked to fund his prototypes, often staying up late into the night to refine his designs. His apartment, a tiny one-bedroom with peeling wallpaper, became a workshop cluttered with blueprints and building materials. He faced rejection after rejection as he pitched his idea to local investors and organizations. Some were polite, others dismissive, but none were interested in taking a chance on him. Still, Daniel refused to give up. He knew what he was building was important. More important than his ego or pride. It was about the people who needed it, the families who would finally have a place to call home. Months turned into years and slowly, Daniel began to see the fruits of his labor. A small nonprofit organization took an interest in his project, offering him a modest grant to build a prototype. The success of that first model caught the attention of a local news station, and soon word of his work began to spread. Meanwhile, Victor Crane's empire continued to grow. His name was synonymous with success, his face plastered across business magazines and news articles. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. Victor's relentless pursuit of profit had earned him plenty of enemies, and whispers of unethical practices began to circulate. Still, Victor dismissed the rumors, confident that his wealth and influence would shield him from any consequences. One day, years after their first encounter, Daniel found himself standing in front of a crowd, addressing a group of investors and community leaders. Behind him, a row of newly constructed homes gleamed in the sunlight, a testament to his vision and hard work. "These homes aren't just buildings," Daniel said, his voice steady and strong. "They're a foundation for families to build their futures. They're proof that dreams, when paired with determination, can become reality." The crowd erupted in applause, and Daniel felt a swell of pride. He had come so far from that humiliating night at the gala. He had built something real, something lasting, without compromising his values. In the audience, a familiar face watched from the shadows. Victor Crane stood at the back of the crowd, his once confident expression replaced by something closer to regret. His empire had crumbled, his wealth and influence stripped away by lawsuits and scandals. He had come to this event out of curiosity, drawn by the name he had once mocked. As Daniel stepped off the stage, Victor approached him hesitantly. For the first time in years, he felt unsure of himself, his usual bravado nowhere to be found. "Daniel," Victor said quietly, his voice almost unrecognizable. "Can we talk?" Daniel turned at the sound of the familiar voice, his eyes narrowing slightly as they landed on Victor. For a moment he said nothing, simply taking in the sight of the man who had once humiliated him. Victor Crane looked nothing like the arrogant billionaire Daniel remembered. His tailored suits were gone, replaced by a simple jacket that seemed slightly too big for his now thinner frame. The sharpness in his eyes had dulled, replaced by something far more subdued. "Victor Crane," Daniel said, his tone even but distant. "I didn't think I'd see you here." Victor managed a weak smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm not exactly where I thought I'd be these days." Daniel raised an eyebrow, the words hanging between them. For years, he had imagined what he might say if he ever saw Victor again. He had rehearsed biting remarks, words that would put the man in his place. But now, face to face with him, Daniel found he didn't need to say anything at all. Victor's presence here, his demeanor, it spoke volumes. "What do you want, Victor?" Daniel asked finally, his voice sharp enough to cut through the polite applause still echoing from the crowd behind them. Victor hesitated, glancing at the home standing proudly behind Daniel. "I read about what you're doing," he said, his voice quiet. "These homes, this project, it's impressive." Daniel crossed his arms, his posture guarded. "I didn't do it for your approval." "I know," Victor said quickly. "And I don't expect you to care what I think. But I was hoping we could talk. Privately." Daniel considered him for a long moment before nodding. "There's a coffee shop down the street. Meet me there in an hour." Victor looked surprised but grateful. "Thank you. I'll see you there." The coffee shop was quiet when Daniel arrived, the hum of conversation and the occasional clink of cups providing a soothing backdrop. Victor was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee in front of him. He looked up as Daniel approached, his expression a mix of apprehension and hope. Daniel sat across from him, folding his hands on the table. "So, what is it you wanted to talk about?" Victor took a deep breath, his hands wrapping tightly around his cup as if it were the only thing grounding him. "I need your help." Daniel blinked, not sure he had heard correctly. "My help?" Victor nodded, his gaze dropping to the table. "I know I don't deserve it. After everything I said to you, I wouldn't blame you if you walked out of here right now. But I don't have anywhere else to turn." Daniel leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Why don't you start from the beginning?" Victor hesitated, then began to speak. He told Daniel about the years following their encounter, the rise of his empire, the accolades, the wealth. But then came the lawsuits, the betrayals, the scandals that brought it all crashing down. His company was gone, his fortune depleted. He had lost his home, his connections, and his reputation. For the first time in his life he was at rock bottom. "I was arrogant," Victor admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "I thought I was untouchable. But the truth is I didn't build an empire, I built a house of cards. And it all came tumbling down." Daniel listened in silence, his eyes fixed on Victor as he spoke. He didn't interrupt, though his mind raced with memories of that humiliating night and the years of struggle that had followed. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," Victor said, his voice cracking slightly. "But I need a fresh start. I don't have the resources to rebuild, but I can work. I can help. I need a chance." Daniel leaned forward, his gaze steady. "You mocked me when I asked you for help. You laughed at my dream. And now you want me to help you?" Victor winced, the words cutting deep. "I know. And if you say no, I'll understand. But I've changed, Daniel. I've had to." Daniel studied him for a long moment, his thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. He thought about the people who had believed in him when no one else did, the second chances he had been given. Could he do the same for Victor? Could he let go of the bitterness and extend a hand to the man who had once belittled him? Finally, Daniel spoke. "I'll think about it." Days passed, and Daniel couldn't get Victor's words out of his head. He replayed their conversation over and over, wrestling with the decision. On one hand, he had every reason to walk away, to leave Victor to deal with the consequences of his actions. But on the other hand, wasn't his entire project built on the idea of lifting people up? Of giving them the tools to rebuild their lives? The answer came to him one evening as he walked through the community he had helped create. Children played in the streets, families gathered on porches, and the laughter and warmth were palpable. This was what he had dreamed of, people thriving because someone had believed in them. The next morning, Daniel called Victor. "Meet me at my office," he said simply. Victor arrived looking nervous but determined. He sat across from Daniel, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I've decided to help you," Daniel said, his voice firm. "But on my terms?" Victor nodded quickly. "Anything. Just tell me what I need to do." "You'll start at the bottom," Daniel continued. "No special treatment, no shortcuts. You'll work alongside the people in this community, learning what it means to build something from the ground up. And if you want a fresh start, you'll have to earn it." Victor swallowed hard but nodded. "I understand." "Good," Daniel said. "Because this isn't about you anymore. It's about the people who need our help. If you're serious about changing, this is where it starts." Victor's journey was slow and humbling. He worked tirelessly alongside the construction crews, learning the skills and values he had once dismissed. At first, the community was wary of him, but over time his dedication and sincerity began to win them over. Daniel watched from a distance, his initial skepticism giving way to a quiet sense of pride. He had given Victor a chance, and the man was rising to meet it. In the end, they weren't just rebuilding homes, they were rebuilding lives. And as Victor stood alongside Daniel at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new community center, he realized that this was the life he had been searching for all along. As weeks turned into months, Victor's transformation became undeniable. The once arrogant billionaire was now a man humbled by sweat and hard labor. He worked side by side with people who had faced challenges he couldn't have imagined in his previous life. The work was grueling but honest, and for the first time in years, Victor felt something he hadn't in a long time: purpose. He became a fixture in the community. He spent his days hauling materials, painting walls, and helping build homes that would house families who desperately needed them. At first, people whispered about him, "Isn't that the guy who was in all those scandals?" But as they watched him dedicate himself to the work, their attitudes began to shift. He was no longer Victor Crane, the disgraced billionaire. He was just Victor, the man who showed up every day and gave his all. One day, after hours of work under the blazing sun, Victor sat on the edge of a newly constructed porch, sipping water and wiping sweat from his brow. Daniel walked over, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You've been at it for weeks now," Daniel said, handing Victor a cup. "I'm impressed." Victor gave a small, tired smile. "I've got a lot to prove." Daniel sat beside him, his gaze sweeping over the row of homes they'd built together. "It's not about proving anything, Victor. It's about the work. About the people who live here." Victor nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've spent my whole life chasing success. Building wealth, crushing competition. But none of it ever felt real. This feels real." Daniel studied him for a moment, weighing his words. "That's the difference between building something for yourself and building something for others. When it's for others, it lasts." Victor looked out at the children playing in the street, their laughter filling the air. "I see that now. I just wish I'd figured it out sooner." Victor's commitment didn't go unnoticed. Over time, he became a trusted member of Daniel's team, offering insights and ideas that helped streamline their operations. His business acumen, once used to amass personal wealth, was now directed toward improving the community. One evening, as they worked late in the office, Daniel leaned back in his chair and regarded Victor thoughtfully. "I've been meaning to ask, what made you come to me? Why not try to rebuild somewhere else?" Victor set down the blueprints he'd been reviewing and sighed. "When everything fell apart, I didn't just lose my money. I lost myself. The Victor Crane everyone admired was gone, and I didn't know who I was without him. Then I saw your name in the news and I remembered that night at the gala." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "The night you humiliated me?" Victor winced. "Yes. I couldn't stop thinking about how wrong I'd been. About how I dismissed you without a second thought. And then I saw what you'd built, what I mocked you for even daring to dream. I knew if anyone could teach me how to start over, it was you." Daniel was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You were right about one thing that night," he said finally. Dreams alone don't pay the bills. But dreams with action? That's where the magic happens. Victor nodded, his gaze steady. I see that now. And I'm grateful you gave me the chance to be part of it. The months rolled by and the community continued to thrive. Families moved into their new homes, businesses began to flourish, and a sense of pride filled the air. At the heart of it all stood Daniel and Victor, two men who had started on opposite sides of the spectrum but had found common ground in their shared mission. Victor had become a mentor to many of the young men and women in the community, sharing not just his business knowledge but the hard lessons he'd learned about integrity and resilience. He often told them, success isn't about what you have. It's about what you leave behind. At a community gathering one evening, Daniel stood before a crowd to address them. Victor stood off to the side, watching as Daniel spoke with the same conviction that had once driven him to approach a powerful billionaire with nothing but an idea. This community is proof that no matter where you come from or what you've faced, you can rise above it, Daniel said, his voice carrying over the crowd. It's not about where you start, it's about where you're willing to go. The crowd erupted into applause, and Victor felt a lump rise in his throat. For the first time, he understood what it meant to build something meaningful. Something that would outlive him. As the gathering wound down, Victor approached Daniel. I never told you how much this has meant to me, he said, his voice quiet. You didn't just give me a second chance. You gave me a reason to be better. Daniel smiled. Everyone deserves a second chance, Victor. What matters is what you do with it. Victor extended his hand and Daniel shook it firmly. In that moment, the weight of their shared journey seemed to settle between them, an unspoken understanding of how far they had both come. Years later, as Victor stood on the porch of his own modest home in the community, he watched the sun set over the neighborhood he had helped build. The man who had once laughed at another's dream had become part of something far greater than himself, and for the first time in his life he felt whole. Victor's days in the community became a routine he cherished, each moment filled with purpose and quiet fulfillment. He would rise early, join the construction crews, and work shoulder to shoulder with people whose lives he once couldn't have imagined understanding. There was no grandeur, no limelight, just the steady hum of progress and the satisfaction of creating something tangible. One morning, as Victor walked through the neighborhood, he saw a young boy riding his bicycle down a newly paved street. The boy waved at him, his smile wide and bright. It was such a simple gesture, yet it carried a weight Victor hadn't felt before. This place, these people, they were thriving. And somehow he had played a small part in it. Good morning, Mr. Crane, the boy called out, his voice echoing through the quiet street. Victor waved back, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Morning, Jamie. Don't ride too fast now. The boy laughed and sped off, his laughter ringing like music in the air. Victor stood there for a moment, letting the scene wash over him. This was what it meant to build something lasting, not just homes but hope. As Victor's reputation in the community grew, so did his resolve to make amends for his past. He began spearheading new initiatives, after-school programs, skill-building workshops, and even a scholarship fund for young people who wanted to pursue higher education. These weren't grand gestures designed to restore his former glory. They were genuine efforts to give back, to ensure others had opportunities he had once taken for granted. One day, Daniel approached Victor with a proposal. There's a plot of land just outside the city, he said, spreading a map across the table. It's perfect for expanding the project. We could build more homes, maybe even a community center. Victor studied the map, his mind already racing with possibilities. What's the catch? It's going to take a lot of work, Daniel admitted. Fundraising, permits, labor. It's ambitious, but I think we can do it. Victor nodded, a spark of determination in his eyes. Let's make it happen. The project became a labor of love for both men. They spent months rallying support, meeting with potential donors, and navigating the labyrinth of bureaucracy. It wasn't easy, there were setbacks, delays, and moments of doubt, but they pressed on. As the first foundations were laid, Victor found himself reflecting on how far he had come. The man who had once dismissed dreams as foolish was now pouring everything he had into helping others achieve theirs. It was a full-circle moment, one that filled him with a quiet pride. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Victor and Daniel stood side by side at the construction site. The framework of the first new home loomed before them, a testament to their shared vision. You know, Victor said, his voice thoughtful, if someone had told me years ago that I'd be standing here, doing this, I wouldn't have believed them. Daniel chuckled, clapping him on the shoulder. Life has a funny way of surprising you. Victor nodded, a smile playing at his lips. It does. And sometimes, those surprises are exactly what we need. The expansion project became a resounding success, attracting attention from across the country. News outlets picked up the story, highlighting the transformative power of the initiative and the unlikely partnership between Daniel and Victor. For Victor, the recognition was secondary. What mattered most was seeing the joy on people's faces as they moved into their new homes, the spark of hope that came with a fresh start. One evening, as Victor sat on his porch, a familiar face appeared at the gate. It was Jamie, the young boy from the neighborhood, clutching a sketchbook in his hands. "Mr. Crane," Jamie said, his voice shy but eager. "I made something for you." Victor smiled and motioned for him to come closer. Jamie handed over the sketchbook, his eyes bright with anticipation. Inside were pages filled with drawings of the neighborhood, the homes, the people, the vibrant life that had blossomed here. "This is incredible, Jamie," Victor said, his voice filled with genuine awe. "You're quite the artist." Jamie beamed. "I wanted to show you how much this place means to us. To me." Victor felt a lump rise in his throat as he flipped through the pages. Each drawing was a reminder of why he had chosen this path, why he had worked so hard to make amends. "Thank you, Jamie," he said softly. "This means more to me than you'll ever know." Years later, Victor stood at the grand opening of the new community center, the culmination of years of hard work and collaboration. The crowd was large, filled with familiar faces and new ones alike. As Daniel stepped up to the microphone to deliver his speech, Victor stood in the back, content to watch from the sidelines. "This center is more than just a building," Daniel said, his voice strong and clear. "It's a symbol of what can happen when people come together, when they believe in something greater than themselves. None of this would have been possible without the hard work and dedication of so many people, including someone who has taught me the true meaning of redemption and resilience." Daniel turned his gaze to Victor, a small smile on his lips. "Victor Crane, thank you for proving that it's never too late to change." The crowd erupted into applause, and Victor felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He hadn't expected the recognition, but in that moment, it felt like a validation of everything he had worked for. As the applause died down, Victor stood quietly, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He wasn't the man he had once been, and for that, he was grateful. The dreams he had once mocked had become his salvation, and the people he had once overlooked had become his greatest teachers. For the first time in his life, Victor Crane felt truly at peace. The weeks turned into months, and Carter proved to be one of the hardest workers in the community project. Victor, though initially skeptical, began to see a transformation in his old partner. The man who had once been consumed by greed now seemed determined to make amends. Carter stayed late to help, volunteered for the toughest tasks, and spent his weekends teaching younger workers the business skills he had once wielded selfishly. But Victor knew better than anyone that change wasn't always linear. He had seen it in himself. Redemption was a road filled with potholes, and it was often one step forward, two steps back. One day, Daniel approached Victor while they worked at a construction site. "You've been quiet lately," Daniel said, leaning against a pile of lumber. "Everything okay?" Victor paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking." "About Carter?" Victor nodded. "He's doing everything right. More than I expected, honestly. But there's still a part of me that wonders if he's only doing it because he has no other choice." Daniel crossed his arms, his expression thoughtful. "That's the thing about second chances. They're not just about what someone does with the opportunity, they're about what we do in giving it." Victor glanced at Daniel, his brow furrowed. "You think I'm being too hard on him?" "I think you're holding on to the past," Daniel said. "And I get it. I really do. But if we're going to build something lasting here, we can't let old wounds fester. It's not about forgetting, it's about moving forward." The opportunity for closure came sooner than Victor expected. A few weeks later, the community gathered for the groundbreaking ceremony of the next phase of the project. Carter had been instrumental in the planning, and his contributions hadn't gone unnoticed. As the crowd applauded the announcement, Carter stood off to the side, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. After the speeches, Victor approached him. "Good work today," he said, his tone neutral but genuine. Carter looked up, startled by the unexpected compliment. "Thanks. I just want to help." Victor nodded, his gaze steady. "You've been doing a lot more than that." There was a long silence between them before Victor spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said. About earning trust." Carter straightened, his expression earnest. "And? I'm starting to believe you," Victor admitted. "But if this is going to work, if you're going to be part of this for the long haul, you need to know that trust doesn't erase what happened. It builds something new." Carter nodded slowly, his voice soft. I don't expect anything else. I just want to keep building. Victor extended a hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Carter shook it. It wasn't forgiveness, not entirely, but it was a start. The project continued to grow, becoming a hub of hope for the community. Every day brought new challenges but also new victories. Carter had become an indispensable part of the team, his meticulous planning and tireless work ethic ensuring that each phase of the development proceeded smoothly. He had even earned the respect of many in the community, who once whispered about his past but now saw him as a man genuinely trying to rebuild. One evening, after a long day of work, Victor found himself sitting on the edge of a half-constructed porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. Carter approached, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. Mind if I join you? Carter asked, his voice tentative. Victor gestured to the spot next to him. Not at all. Carter handed him a cup before settling onto the wooden beam. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of unspoken thoughts hanging between them. This place is really starting to feel like something, isn't it? Carter finally said, gesturing to the rows of newly built homes. Victor nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. It is. Every nail, every board, it's a fresh start for people who need it. And for us, Carter added quietly. Victor glanced at him, his expression thoughtful. Yeah, maybe for us too. Carter stared into his coffee, his brow furrowed. I know I have a long way to go, Victor. And I don't expect to erase what I've done. But being here, doing this work, it's the first time in years I've felt like I'm part of something good. Victor sighed, setting his cup down. Carter, you've been doing great work. Better than I could have expected. But redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about building a better future. Carter nodded, his eyes glistening. That's all I want, a chance to build something better. The following weeks were some of the busiest yet. As the next phase of the project unfolded, Carter's role expanded. He led planning meetings, coordinated with contractors, and even hosted workshops for young community members interested in construction and business. His natural charisma and sharp mind shone through, and for the first time in years, he seemed genuinely at ease. Victor watched this transformation with a mix of pride and caution. He wanted to believe in Carter's change, but a part of him still clung to the memory of betrayal. Could a man like Carter truly leave his past behind, or was this just another calculated move? The question lingered one afternoon when Victor overheard a conversation between Carter and a group of volunteers. They were joking about the challenges of construction when one of them asked Carter why he worked so hard. Redemption, Carter said simply, his tone serious. When you've been given a second chance, you owe it to yourself, and everyone who believed in you, to make it count. The word struck Victor deeply. He knew what it felt like to carry the weight of redemption, to face the skepticism of others while trying to rebuild. Maybe it was time to let go of the past and truly give Carter the trust he had worked so hard to earn. A week later, Victor decided to take a small but significant step toward that trust. He approached Carter during a quiet moment at the site. Carter, he began, I've been thinking. You've taken on a lot here and you've done more than just work hard. You've inspired people. You've earned their respect and mine. Carter's eyes widened slightly. Victor, Victor held up a hand, stopping him. Let me finish. I think it's time you take on an official leadership role in the project. I want you to be part of the core team, helping plan, make decisions, and shape where we go from here. Carter was silent for a moment, his expression a mix of surprise and gratitude. Victor, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Victor replied with a small smile. Carter nodded, his voice steady. Yes, I'll do my best to live up to this. Victor extended his hand and Carter shook it firmly. In that moment, a subtle but profound shift occurred between them. It wasn't just about redemption anymore, it was about partnership, about building something greater than either of them could achieve alone. As the project's groundbreaking ceremony approached, the community buzzed with excitement. Families who had already moved into their new homes spoke with pride about the transformation of their neighborhood, and those waiting eagerly anticipated their turn. On the day of the ceremony, Victor and Carter stood side by side as Daniel addressed the crowd, his words filled with hope and gratitude. When the time came to break ground, Victor handed the ceremonial shovel to Carter. You've earned this, Victor said quietly. Carter hesitated, then stepped forward, his hands gripping the shovel tightly. As he plunged it into the earth, the crowd erupted into cheers. For Carter, it was a moment of profound significance, a tangible symbol of his journey toward redemption. As the event wound down, Carter found Victor near the edge of the site, watching as children played in the open spaces between the homes. You were right, Carter said, his voice steady. Redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about what we build now. Victor smiled faintly, his gaze still on the children. And we've only just begun. Months later, the community stood on the cusp of another milestone. The new homes, a school, and a resource center were ready to open. The project had grown beyond anything Victor or Daniel had imagined, fueled by the collective effort of the people who lived and worked there. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Daniel once again addressed the crowd, his voice strong and clear. This is more than a neighborhood. It's a testament to what happens when we believe in each other, when we lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. Every brick, every nail, every coat of paint is a reminder that no dream is too small, and no mistake is too great to overcome. The crowd erupted into cheers, and Victor found himself standing next to Carter, who had been quietly watching the scene unfold. You helped make this happen, Victor said, surprising even himself with the admission. So did you, Carter replied, his voice filled with quiet gratitude. Victor smiled faintly, his gaze sweeping over the neighborhood. We all did. As the sun set that evening, Victor walked through the streets of the community, taking in the laughter and joy that filled the air. Families gathered on porches, children played in the parks, and a sense of hope permeated every corner. He thought about how far he had come, from the arrogant billionaire who had mocked a dream to the man who had learned the value of humility, hard work, and redemption. When he reached his modest home, he found Daniel waiting on the porch, 2 cups of coffee in hand. Victor took a seat beside him, accepting one of the cups with a nod of thanks. You've built something incredible here, Victor said after a moment, his voice tinged with admiration. We built it, Daniel corrected. Together. Victor chuckled softly, his gaze distant. You know, if someone had told me years ago that I'd end up here, I would have laughed in their face. Daniel grinned. Funny how life works, isn't it? Victor nodded, his expression thoughtful. Yeah, funny. And humbling. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the last rays of sunlight faded into twilight. For Victor, it was a moment of quiet contentment, a reminder that even the most broken paths could lead to something beautiful. He wasn't the man he had once been. He wasn't trying to be. And for the first time in his life, that was enough.